It was on the field of Gaugamela in 331 BC that the Hellenic League, led by the Macedonian king Alexander the Great, achieved their most decisive victory over the empire of the Persian Achaemenids. After significant early victories mixed with a few more difficult engagements, such as at Tyre, the Greeks had pushed deep into the heartlands of the Persians, taking Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt along the way, until they finally engaged the great king Darius for one final battle which both sides knew would decide the fate of the war. The Greek army was largely made up of elite hoplite infantry, whose role was to hold the enemy back in the centre with the use of their exceptionally long spears. These infantry units were bolstered and supported by elite companion cavalry operating on both wings. Alexander led the right wing personally, whereas his second in command, the veteran general Parmenion, held the left. The fighting was fierce, as Darius attempted to use his superior numbers, elite chariots and heavy infantry, known as immortals, to overwhelm Alexander's centre. On the left-hand side, Parmenion barely held on against an onslaught of cavalry from all corners of the Persian Empire. This had been the plan all along, however, and before long, Alexander's companions on the right-hand side spotted a weakness in the Persian line. In a characteristically brazen move, Alexander charged forwards, punching a hole directly through the Persian cavalry towards the exposed rearguard where Darius himself stood, dictating orders to his troops. It was exactly the opposite of what the Persian Great King had bargained for, after spending weeks preparing the battleground to create his own advantage. And before long, he fled the field, rather than being cut down or captured by Alexander's elite cavalry. It was Parmenion on the left who took the brunt of the fighting, in somehow holding out against the Persian cavalry. His discipline and training ultimately created the means by which Alexander could strike directly into the heart of the Persian centre. Gaugamela was the culmination of a lengthy military career, during which the veteran commander had distinguished himself first under Alexander's father during his wars in Greece, and later under his son during his conquests. Yet even so, just a year later he was dead, killed by assassins sent by Alexander himself. Parmenion had been born in around 400 BC. It was a time when, to most Greeks, Macedon was still largely seen as a backward kingdom on the periphery of the civilized world. Nevertheless, it was certainly a kingdom on the rise. Hailing from a noble family, Parmenion fought in the army of Philip II during his numerous wars of conquest, where he developed one of the greatest fighting forces in the world. Parmenion was a trusted commander during these wars, and even led armies by himself for Philip on a number of occasions, winning substantial victories over the neighbouring Illyrian people in 356 BC, and against the numerous other Greek-speaking peoples to the south. He was amongst the delegations sent to Athens in 346 BC to conclude peace talks. By 336, Macedon had achieved almost total victory over the other Greek states, and now ruled over them as the head of a mighty Hellenic League. At this stage, Philip decided to go even further, and he fixed his gaze eastward to the Greek city-states of Ionia in Asia Minor, which lay under Persian domination. During this time, he sent Parmenion along with an army of 10,000 men into Asia Minor to rally these Greek cities into rebellion against the Persians. It was an incursion designed to lay the groundwork for a larger invasion he eventually planned to lead himself. This wouldn't be the case, however, and the invasion was interrupted by Philip's death later that year. And although his son Alexander was named his successor, the ease of that succession was far from certain. Over in Asia Minor, one of Parmenion's lead generals and a relation of his, Attalus, opposed the succession. In response, Parmenion, loyal as ever to the Macedonian royal family, had his old friend put to death and sent word to Alexander of his own loyalty. In one swift move, Parmenion had retained his own trusted position in the Macedonian army, and members of his own family were thus appointed to leading positions throughout the army of reinforcements which Alexander would bring over in 334 when he crossed over the Hellespont. Parmenion's oldest son, Philotas, was made the commander of Alexander's elite companion cavalry. Over the next 3 years, the Macedonian army would ravage its way through Asia Minor, defeating the local Persian satraps at every turn. The army split into two on occasion, with Parmenion leading the one and Alexander the other. Finally, by 331, the Persians, under Darius, had been pushed all the way back to Mesopotamia. where they had amassed a large force for one final battle. It took place near the town of Gaugamela, not far from Babylon, and in its aftermath, the Persian Achaemenid Empire was effectively brought to an end. Alexander continued to push eastwards in the aftermath of the battle, mopping up resistance in the most far-flung provinces of the empire, in eastern Persia and Central Asia. It was then, in 330 BC, that he received a terrible piece of news. A plot had been uncovered amongst some of his own most loyal servants. Specifically implicated was the son of Parmenion, Philotas, who, although claiming his innocence all the while, was subsequently tortured and put to death. According to Greek custom, the father of a family is always responsible for the actions of the children, and thus, not one to argue with tradition, Alexander immediately sealed off his camp and dispatched 2 riders to Parmenion's position at Ecbatana, where he commanded the rearguard of the army and guarded the royal treasury. Despite a complete lack of evidence linking the veteran commander to any plots against Alexander, the king likely feared the repercussions if he be allowed to live, and his old friend was quickly assassinated upon the arrival of Alexander's men. Parmenion, loyal to the end, had cordially greeted these men like brothers, and likely had no idea what was happening until the very end. Alexander lived on for another 7 years, increasingly viewing himself as a god on earth, as he subjugated more and more people under his rule, going even further eastwards than the Persians ever had, and forging the largest empire the world had ever known.